in the Justice Studies Department at SJSU since 2007. So just a couple of words, really very briefly, because I really don't have much to say about this yet, about my latest research and what I'm trying to do right now. So since 2000, living in Oakland actually has given me an opportunity to finally see the things that I had been writing, reading, theorizing about from a distance. I got a chance to see what an inner city is, what a segregated neighborhood is, what racial segregation, class segregation means, besides fancy theories about it. And having basically quit my active militancy since 2005, 2004, I started feeling a little bit of disconnect between my theoretical interests and my daily engagement with the very people and issues and social conditions that I was reflecting and writing about. So in 2011, I decided to start something that I had never done before, and it kind of scared me a little bit, but it's also a fascinating experience, which is an ethnographic study of prisoner reentry in Oakland. I had never done ethnography before. I had never interviewed anyone before. I actually hadn't been trained in qualitative or quantitative research. I'm purely theoretical. But this is part of the challenge, and I think it's what is making this interesting, at least from a subjective point of view. So I've started this ethnographic project in West Oakland. What I'm studying is a group of people, a group of prisoners who are returning to West Oakland after long periods of incarceration in state or federal prison. And I've been able to start this research thanks to a CAHRS Research Incentive grant that I got in 2011. And I must say, throughout the past year, I have been collecting a lot of interesting material. I have been befriending a significant number of ex-prisoners, and they've been opening up, I think, in ways that I couldn't really foresee. And this has been really an intense experience, and something that I think is going to last for me for very long, because it's supposed to, methodologically speaking, ethnographies last for years. So, but I made peace with this idea. I'm very happy about this. So this is what I'm doing right now. Unfortunately, I can't tell you more about this research because it is really still in the making, and I don't feel comfortable talking about my subjects yet. But it's definitely something that hopefully I will be able to talk to you about later. So what did I get from all this? Well, I get that it's good to choose a course of study you don't like, because studying what I didn't like helped me discover what I actually did like. It's good to do a PhD in the most boring and secluded place that you can find. And I think, personally speaking, most importantly, it's crucial to be politically involved and to let theory and praxis inspire each other. I must say, whatever I did, particularly in my early years, so to speak, between 2000 and 2005, I owe it to the people that I've been doing politics with as much as to my own energies and self-discipline. I definitely see those things and those years as a collective experience. Finally, my suggestion is don't be afraid of making new starts, even if this involves some trouble. Okay. Thank you.
All right, so we have about 10, 12 minutes for questions, so we can open it up and you can run the show.
So I'm really curious, do you really believe that incarceration, imprisonment is a way of regulating the court? Now after I know you studied it, but now in your heart, do you believe that's the truth?
Yes, I do.
Is that what you're finding in the population you're meeting with?
Yes. Now, yes, I do believe that the penal system functions as a tool to regulate the poor. I also find, however, that this specific view is a little bit simplistic to the extent that it doesn't, or it didn't, take into account other variables that are associated with poverty. Racial inequality being the most prominent of them. Urban segregation, like geographical segregation. But I still do believe definitely that the poor are the target of the penal system, that the penal system exercises a formidable force, a formidable push to force the poor into the lowest ranks of the labor market. I see my subjects literally forced to accept any available job because that's the only way for them to be free, so to speak. And I say free, so to speak, because someone who is disenfranchised has no right to vote, has no right to apply for food stamps, general assistance, well, any federal kind of program as a consequence of a drug conviction is free. But I definitely believe that it is a tool to regulate the poor, as much as welfare is. It's just a different type. Bourdieu spoke of the left hand of the state and the right hand of the state, as quoted in Bacan, a very interesting book called Punishing the Poor, as tools for regulating the poor. When the welfare state was in, for the brief period that the United States had a welfare system, it was meant to regulate the poor in a more or less punitive way, depending on the overall conditions of the economy. And I think the penal system is doing the same, just by different means. Sorry.
Well, I would follow through, but, question.
Maybe following Jerry's question. So what you said is applicable to European countries or other developed countries, but I don't see as high sort of incarceration rates in those countries. So how do you explain in those, maybe the beginning was very similar, the ideas you mentioned, Europe and then America, but 1970, this country took off,
yes,
but much higher, and now quite different
yes
outcome. So how do you explain those kind of welfare state, those kind of, the concentration of poverty in this country, or the disparity between rich and poor? But do we see in other countries, such as European countries?
Well, first of all, I think if you look at the European state, continental Europe, for example, it is true that continental European countries have significantly lower incarceration rates. And those are also the countries that have the most significant, stronger welfare states. So that tells you, if anything, that indeed the two are somehow, complementary systems to regulate the poor. Indeed, the European states that have the strongest welfare systems also have the lowest incarceration rates. Germany, for example, and to some extent France. To some extent Italy too, but it's a slightly different system, like corporatist, neo-corporative system. And actually, if you look at England, that has the economic system, socio-economic system that is the closest to the United States in Europe, it has the highest incarceration rates in Europe, right? So you can argue that there seems to be what Dario Melossi actually called an elective affinity in following Weber, between neoliberal economic, socio-economic, and pursued basically the comparable political economic shifts, basically downsizing the welfare state, liberalizing the economy, privatizing services, attacking a frontal attack on unions and the labor movement in general. So all these things together converged, I think, toward a punitive agenda, toward reframing of penal politics in the United States. add in the United States a peculiar situation, which is the racial divide in the United States. In the aftermath of the civil rights movement of the 1960s, actually at the very height of that movement, we know that there definitely was a backlash against the civil rights movement. There was a racialized reaction against what was perceived as a rioting minorities and criminals taking the streets and rioting against against the establishment. I think to some extent this punitive turn was sort of a revenge. I don't know how to say it. Revanchist politics against against all that had been happening in the 1960s. The labor movement gaining control over the labor process, women gaining control over their bodies, with the feminist movement, prisoners gaining control over their conditions with the prisoner rights movement. American society was in turmoil somehow, and I think cyclically power elites need to regain control over a society that escapes their control. And politically speaking, I think the power elite in the United States, starting with Goldwater, Nixon, and then Reagan, were able to regain that control with the support of public opinion and the electorate by framing social problems and social anxieties that were rising at the time in terms of criminal danger and in terms of law and order. Power elites need enemies to sort of build consensus around them, and the criminals usually function as enemies, public enemies.
Well, we're about out of time. We're a little over time, so thank you once again, Alessandro.
Thank you.
For